and they were from all over the country. So
Yeah, okay. I think we're live. Yeah. I just got to click up. It always surprises me, even though I know it's coming like every week. But welcome to another Rev War Revelry. It's like deja vu. We're back talking to the esteemed historian Michael Harris, and this time we're talking about Germantown, which is his new publication out about this pivotal battle. We're also joined by Mark Malloy of Emerging Rev War. You can actually see Mark at the pivotal battle of Germantown there on the steps behind him. So thank you, Mark, and Michael. Thanks for coming back and joining us here at Emerging Rev War on a Sunday night to talk about your new book.
Well, thanks for having me.
So the first question is let's for all the viewers on there who's Googling right now Germantown because they think the only battle fought in 1777 in October was a little one in New York called Saratoga. Give us some context. Where is Germantown? Why was it fought?
All right. Well, where is it? In the 18th century, it's a village about, I don't know, maybe 20 miles northwest of downtown Old City, Philadelphia. It's going to take place about 3 weeks after the Battle of Brandywine. And so the real basics, without getting too complicated yet, is there's a series of maneuvers after Brandywine. William Howe is able to cross the Schuylkill River in mid-September and occupy Philadelphia on September 26th. But when he does occupy Philadelphia, he leaves a significant garrison or camp at the village of Germantown. And it's that garrison that Washington chooses to strike a blow against or attempt to on October 4th.
So October 4th, Washington's, so obviously if you followed the Zoom a few weeks ago with Michael Harris here, we talked about some of the battles after Brandywine that led to it. So Washington's army has now lost Philadelphia in the end of September of 1777. Washington's plan, what is, it's another similar design to, I think, a battle Mark wrote about, right, Trenton, a multiple converging column. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's incredibly complicated for the nature of this army at that time. I mean, you got to remember it's pre-Valley Forge, so they haven't really gone through the formal training yet. They haven't. A lot of the army's been. It's all new regiments. They had to rebuild the army after '76 when the 1-year enlistments expired. So the fact that he even attempts this is stunning. Basically, it's 5 columns on 5 different roads, 4 of which are to converge on Germantown, and one's a diversionary column. And the stunning thing is that they march all night, and they all basically show up where they're supposed to, pretty close to when they're supposed to. It's rather stunning that they pulled that off.
I got a question. This battle happens less than a month after the defeat at Brandywine. How demoralized was the Continental Army from Brandywine, and what kind of pressure was Washington under to try and do something? And was he ultimately trying to recapture Philadelphia, or was he merely trying to show that his army had some force in it?
There's a lot of questions there. Let's start with the demoralization. Let's start with the first one. I would argue they're not demoralized after Brandywine. If you read the letters and the diaries and the journals in the aftermath, they actually thought they dealt a blow against Howe. They actually were under the impression, for 2 reasons. They were mistakenly under the impression they inflicted a lot of casualties. But that's kind of a myth. I can go into that if you want to. But the secondary thing is the fact that Howe doesn't pursue them for 5 days is the real reason they thought that they had dealt a blow, and they had just had to find the next opportunity to attack them again. So that's your second question was then.
Well, what kind of pressure was Washington? Was he being pushed to try and recapture Philly, or?
No, I have not. Yeah, it's a good question. I have not found that Congress was saying you got to go get the city back. I wouldn't say that. I would say he was under pressure to do something, because by the time they make the attack on Germantown, they already found out about what's the September 19 battle? Is that Freeman's Farm?
Yeah, Freeman's
Yeah,
Farm.
so he already found out about that victory on September 19th from the Northern Army. But he also really thought that he could create this noose, so to speak, on Philadelphia. Because when the British captured Philadelphia, they still did not have river access to the city, and they could not get their supply ships up to Philadelphia. And then throughout the campaign, as Washington's retreating and giving up ground, he actually ordered the grinding stones removed from all the mills. So there's no food coming into Philadelphia, even for the civilians. It's a huge issue. So he basically wants to sort of starve them out. But then the other thing he finds out is how from basically the day after the Battle of Brandywine up until about October, I'm trying to remember the dates, either October 1st or 2nd, he's sending detachments away from the army. So the British army that's at Germantown is a shadow of the army that fought at Brandywine. Not that Howe's army as a whole shrunk, but he had sent detachments all over the place to Wilmington, Delaware, and Chester, and then the garrison for Philadelphia. So the army that he attacks at Germantown is about half the size of the army that he fought at Brandywine.
And it's kind of true. I mean, that the mobilization of the army. I mean, it's after Brandywine. I mean, reading your book, Michael, it seems like the army is in decent spirits even through that. I mean, they fought well. They just lost. I mean, or as you said, Washington lost it. I know I don't want to do that can of worms with Mark Malloy here because we'll go off on that. But one of the things that impressed me most about Germantown, and this is my 2 cents, is that Washington's army turns around in a few weeks, but also how it plays internationally. We can talk about that a little bit later, but I just wanted to that point out. So the 5 contingent, one guy I would like to discuss, and I feel like he gets written off way too quick, is the guy with 2 first names, Adam Stephen. I know he drinks, but he's leading one of the things now. Is he really the scapegoat at Germantown?
How do I want to answer that? No. It's
leadership.
He performs terribly. And forget the drinking part for a minute.
All right.
He performs awfully at Germantown. So just an example, he commands one of the divisions at Germantown, but there's at least 2 might be 3, I'm trying to remember now. There's at least 2 documented incidences where he's giving orders to people that aren't under his command, which means he's not in tactical control of his own division. Why does that matter? One of his brigades ends up blundering into the north side of the Cliveden fight and firing into the troops assaulting Cliveden. And his artillery that brigade's artillery actually overshoots Cliveden and ends up hitting the New Jersey brigade while they're assaulting Cliveden. So tactically, leadership-wise, he has a terrible day. Now, whether he was actually drunk there, you could argue that point, because there's a lot of partisan testimony against him at the court-martial. But was he actually drunk? I mean, who wasn't drinking in that army? So, but he is going to end up taking the fall. And the Stephen thing is fascinating to me because there are 4 court-martials of general officers in the aftermath of Germantown. Stephen, obviously, but so is Maxwell's court-martialed for his actions at Brandywine and the Battle of the Clouds. Sullivan is court-martialed for Brandywine, and Wayne is court-martialed for Paoli. The other 3 are exonerated. Stephen's the one that basically doesn't do any worse than those 3 did. He's the one that gets thrown out of the army. Now, I propose, I can't prove it, but I propose it in the appendix that I cover all this in. Washington had to find a spot for Lafayette. Remember when he gets wounded at Brandywine, he really doesn't have a command there. And he's recovering from his wound during Germantown, but he's about to come back to the army. Washington's got to find a spot for him, and he's a 2-star general. So it's almost like he was looking for an excuse to get rid of somebody to give a division to Lafayette, because that's a division Lafayette gets.
Washington and Stephen have a long history. It goes back to when they were in Virginia politics, And yeah, at the Trenton, on the march on Trenton, Stephen almost blows the whole surprise because he had some of his soldiers out there the night before or whatever. And Washington was really angry about that. But yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if some of that bad blood that they've had for so long would have contributed to that. But that's interesting. I didn't realize that, yeah, the logistics of like, yeah, where do you put this young French nobleman who you really want to give like a command, and all the seats are taken. So
yeah, and I can't prove it. It's just a theory. You know, there's nothing like, none of them actually write that and say that. But you know, that court martial takes place in November, and like within a week or two, Lafayette's back and has that division. It's just, you know.
As you say, too much smoke to not be a fire there somewhere. So,
Yeah.
No, I was always concerned because, as Mark brought up, I was just literally about to say that there is that long history between him and Adam Stephen, and there is, I mean, you say he blundered more at Trenton or whatever else that he did, and even though technically that maybe helped the cause because they thought that was what a strike or whatnot. I mean, he's going to take credit for it after the fact, even though might not have been. But I was just always curious, yeah, because it is. I mean, he's not worse off, like you said, than any of his other divisions. But
and he actually is one of the ones that fought the best at Brandywine. His division's the last one to retreat from Birmingham Hill. You know, there's more to that story, and I wish I could find it in the primary sources, but there's more to that story than he was drunk at Germantown. And he's actually not cashiered for being drunk. He's exonerated of that charge. He's cashier for, forget the exact wording, but something along the lines of not being with his men. And like I said, there's at least two, there might have been three. I'd have to go back and look at my notes again. There's at least two incidences where he gave orders to people that weren't under his command. And that's what he's actually cashier for. It's not the drunkenness.
So, we have Stephen, whose men he loses tactical command. So it's, let's break it down into the battle. Let's do for our military historian enthusiasts. Let's break the battle down.
If you could give like a brief thing, because on top of this drunkenness story, I feel like the other big one is like the fog.
That's the other
foggy and smoky, and nobody could see anything, and that those two factors ultimately led to the.
I would argue. Well, we'll get it. The fog's not why they lose. I mean, it's a factor, but it's not why they lose. So the basics, I wish we could put a map up because it's super complicated, but there's 5 columns, and I'm going to kind of go sort of southwest to northeast. So the farthest one southwest is a single brigade of Pennsylvania militia under Irvine, a militia general. They're actually south of the Schuylkill River. They're meant to operate roughly, if you know Philadelphia, roughly where 30th Street Station is today, because they're supposed to put on a demonstration and keep Cornwallis from rushing reinforcements to Germantown. Cornwallis commanding the garrison of Philadelphia. So they're not really with the main attack. They're on the south side of the river putting on a show. At least that's what they were supposed to do. Then if you move up to the next column, it's the rest of the Pennsylvania militia under John Armstrong. They are basically hugging the north bank of the Schuylkill River to assault this is getting complicated, the left flank of the British camp, which is where the Hessian Jaegers were. It's basically where the Wissahickon, again, if you know the area, it's where the Wissahickon Creek empties into the Schuylkill River, is roughly where that happens. All right, then if you go to the next column up, that's John Sullivan's column, which is technically 2 divisions. It's his own division under Moses Hazen and Anthony Wayne's Pennsylvania division. They are coming straight down Germantown Road or Germantown Avenue today. They're basically the right side of the main attack. Then the next column up is Nathaniel Green's column, which is his own division under Peter Muhlenberg and Adam Stevens' division, almost entirely Virginians. They are coming down Limekiln Pike. They're basically the left side of the main attack. So all the Continental regulars are in the middle of this attack, and they're the main force of the attack. Then the last column, the farthest one to the northeast, is Maryland and New Jersey militia under William Smallwood. And they come in on the right flank of the British camp. Basically, they're going to hit the Queen's Rangers. That's an okay map.
I'm trying to find a map online real quick. So
I mean, that's an okay map.
just to get some, there's not much. That's why this your book, right? There's not much.
Yeah, the ones in my book are the most current and most accurate. So, but this will work for our purposes. So on the south side, you see the river on the bottom left of this. So you have a militia column that's even farther south off of this map, operating on the opposite, down there where Philadelphia is. Then you see Armstrong's column coming in along the river. Then you have Sullivan with Wayne down the main road. Nathaniel Green comes down Lime Kiln Road up by Lucan's Mill. They come right through Lucan's Mill and they smash into Grant's division. You can see that there. And then
Green's name is spelled wrong. We'll admit that.
Which is spelled wrong. I'm not a fan of this map, but it'll work for our purposes. And then you've got Smallwood's militia doing the far sort of left hook to come down Old York Road onto the right flank. It's very complicated. They're coming over multiple roads. They actually had to leave at different times so they would all arrive at the same time. It's shocking. I mean, the most amazing thing about this battle is that all the columns arrived where they were supposed to, roughly within 10 to 15 minutes of each other. I mean, it's stunning that they pulled that off. And really, everything was highly successful. And I would argue, Mark, that really where everything starts to fall apart is the decision-making at the Chew House. Because despite the fog, and you could argue the drunken issues, everybody was driving the British back. They actually drove way past the Chew House, and they were on the doorstep of driving into the main camp, which was along today's Church Lane, which is basically, you see where Gray and Grant are on this map? That was the main British line of encampment. And they drove into that. In fact, Grant's division was basically routed. Greene destroyed that. Well, I wouldn't say destroyed that division, collapsed that division and had them running. And it was really just all the confusion around the Chew House and the stopping of the American assault, coupled with them starting to run out of ammunition, that Grant was able to regroup, get reinforced by Kniphausen on the other side of the Germantown Avenue. And then they were all able to drive back. But really, it all comes down to what happens at the Chew House and the decision-making that Washington makes, in my opinion.
Yeah, at that, from what I understand, there was something like, Knox told him that, it was unmilitary to have a castle in your rear.
Yeah, I mean, I have a whole chapter on this because it's basically the turning point of the battle. So to kind of break it down, there's the key figures are Washington, Pickering, Timothy Pickering, who's the Army's adjutant general, and Knox. And what happens is, as Sullivan and Wayne are just driving, they get well past the Chew House. Washington stops about, trying to think what that distance is, maybe 100 yards, 150 yards from the Chew House to the north side of it. So he never actually gets to the Chew House. And he hears all the shooting going on in the fog in front of him. And he orders Pickering to ride forward and tell Sullivan to watch his fire because they can't see anything in the fog anyway. They're just wasting ammunition. They basically wanted some time to get they have a whole division of reserve troops that they want to get to the front to continue the attack under Lord Sterling, the New Jersey troops and the North Carolina troops. So he basically wants to give Sterling enough time to deploy, but he doesn't want Sullivan to run out of ammunition. So he orders Pickering to ride down and do this. So Pickering has some great letters about the battle in his journal. I mean, the detail he provides is how we can reconstruct this. So he rides past the Chew House, down finds Sullivan, orders him to slow down his fire or stop firing. And after he delivers that order, he's riding back up Germantown Avenue or Germantown Road. And as he's passing this Chew House, bullets start whizzing past his ears. Now, I think the reason he's not shot at on his way to Sullivan is because Musgrave, or is it Musgrave? Musgrave. Well, is still in the process of barricading the house and getting his guys deployed at the windows. Because all this is sort of happening really quickly. But by the time he's riding back, they've got muskets out those windows just looking for targets. Now, they're at the extreme range of a musket. If you've ever been to the Chew House, you know, that road is not that close to the house. There is an extreme range of a smoothbore. But, you know, they were whizzing by. So,
and about how many guys are in there?
it's about, there's some debate about this. I think he only took at most 2 companies in there.
Okay.
So it's less than 100 guys.
Mhm.
Now, you'll see in some studies, some people say the whole regiment went in there. I don't think that's right. I think 2 companies went in there with him.
Okay.
But you could debate that. So Pickering realizes that the firing, he had never, and he even says it in the letter, I never noticed this house before or knew of it. So he rides over, there's 2 artillery pieces across the road firing at the front of the house. Or no, firing at the angle of the house. And he says to the artillery officer, he goes, you should really redirect your fire at the front of the house, which is a terrible decision because the front and sides of the house are the thickest walls. The rear of the house was basically rubble stone stuccoed over. So had they shot at the rear of the house, they might have caved the walls in. But there was no way they were going to knock in the walls on the front and sides. So, but that's what he does. And he leaves the artillery and he trots up, you know, it's like 2 blocks from the Chew House to this Bill Meyer house, which at the time was all open. The Bill Meyer house was the next house north of Chew. And that's where he finds Washington and this heated debate going on between Knox and several other officers. Caleb Gibbs is involved. Charles Coatsworth Pickney's involved. There's other officers involved. What's his name's son? Congress's
Lawrence,
what'd you say?
John Lawrence.
Yeah, John Lawrence is there. So you have all these people involved with this debate. I'm sure Alexander Hamilton was there. You know, the staff was there. And so the debate's basically Knox just trying to convince Washington that you can't leave this castle in our rear. And everybody else is pretty much arguing you need to bypass this house, detach a regiment from Sterling to keep an eye on these guys and not let them out, and keep pushing. And rather than do that, and it's a heated debate, Washington goes against that. So then the next thing they decide is, well, they'll just surrender. They're surrounded. Let's send a white flag. And Pickering says, mark my words, if you send a flag to that house, the man will not come back alive. And he's right. So they sent a staff officer, one of Sullivan's staff officers, who God knows why he's back there, up the drive to the Chew House. Lord knows how far he got. He didn't get to the house. And he comes back with his leg shattered. So that was a bad idea. So then they decide to bring out more artillery and intensify the fire on the artillery, which rounds are just bouncing off this house. Now, I think the actual infantry assault up the drive was not ordered. I actually think that Ogden of the 1st New Jersey, I can't find anywhere that anybody admits to giving that order. I think Ogden just took it. I think it was a spur of the moment thing, and Ogden did it. And then the 3rd New Jersey followed him. Now, the 2nd and 4th New Jersey do not go up the road. But the 1st and the 3rd charge up that drive, and that's, you know, all the paintings you see of the troops around the house, they're New Jersey troops. But of course, that doesn't work. And then they try to set fire on the house. And some of the paintings of the attack show them moving a wagon of hay up to the side of the house, but it's stone. I mean, it's not going to work. John Lawrence gets shot in the shoulder. He's one of the officers trying to move the wagon. So, I mean, everything just collapses around this house. And now, because all the shooting's going on in their rear, elements of Wayne's division and elements of the Maryland line, elements of Thomas Conway's Pennsylvania Brigade hear all this going on behind them, and they're running out of ammunition. They start to trickle and pull back towards the Chew House. And in the fog, you get all these friendly fire incidents. One of Stevens' brigades trickles in from the north side and shoots into the flank of Wayne's division. I mean, everything collapses because of what happens at the Chew House.
So actually, let's take a moment as you mentioned the Maryland line. We have a question that came in. It goes, was the 2nd Maryland Brigade engaged at Germantown. Were they part of that?
Yeah,
Maryland?
both. Yeah, everybody's they're all there. Yeah,
All that. So
I can tell you who's in command if you really want to know.
someone said there was Lieutenant Colonel William Smith of Virginia who took the flag. He was the deputy adjutant of the Army. From
Yeah.
Colonel Ogden's 1st New Jersey Regiment commented in. So that's the
Yeah.
guy, lucky one who pulls the flag that walks up. Doesn't get as far as Mark Malloy does in the picture there before he.
Well, I mean, in that picture, I took that, when I went up, I guess it was 3 years ago and fell in with the Jersey guys at the reenactment they do every year for the Battle of Germantown, which a lot of people don't realize, that house, the Chew house that lived in that we were talking about, still stands there and is a museum today. And they do a annual reenactment around the house. And I got to say, I really wanted to go when I found out the house was still there, and they actually have British soldiers in the house firing out the windows. And they actually they reenact the Jersey brigades assaulting the regiments assaulting the house. And they do actually reenact that the guy bringing the white flag up and getting shot, doing that as well. But I just thought it was kind of neat that a historic site that's on the battlefield today, even though the battlefield is, totally built up today, it's all developed. This one, very important part of that history still stands, and they do that reenactment, which is kind of.
So as and with the getting back to the battle here, so as they trickle back, I guess would you say that it shows a little bit of success of the Continental Army that the British don't counterattack?
Oh no, well they are going to counterattack.
Or I mean,
they are, because what happens is as they're pulling back, that's the respite that James Grant and Kniphausen needed to basically rebuild a line. Kniphausen's going to shift units from the south, from his division basically, to the north side of the road, because Grant's division was fully. Let me back up. During the initial American assault, all of Grant's division was deployed forward to try to stop the American assault. Kniphausen on the south side of the road never left his camps during the initial American assault. So all his regiments were fresh. But Grant's division, I'll be honest, that division collapsed. But as the Americans got up to this one creek on the north side of Germantown, they were kind of spent. They needed to regroup, especially Green's column. And so they were regrouping. And then as what they were regrouping, Sullivan's running out of ammunition, units started to trickle to the rear of the Chew house. And that gave the time that Kniphausen needed to shift units to the north side to reinforce Grant's flank and give him some fresh regiments. And then as the Americans are pulling back towards the Chew house, they conduct their own assault. And then it's almost, the races were almost on at that point.
And before we move on, it's just running out of ammunition, just for some of the viewers out there. What's the average rounds that a Continental soldier is bringing in? I mean, do we have an idea, Mark or Mike?
Mark, you probably know. Is it 40? It's not 40, is it? What is it, Mark?
I think it would depend. It wouldn't be 40. They couldn't. Most of the cartridge boxes, I think, held less than that. But I don't know. I think it would depend on a lot of factors, but I don't know, 25, 30.
Yeah, and that's not that many. Considering that the assault starts about 6, maybe even a little earlier. And by the time that everything's happened at the Chew house, it's now 8. And, they've been in combat for 2 hours. They probably don't have any ammo left.
Yeah.
And that's also too, like reaching in, pulling out, like you see in any of those wars with black powder weapons, it's not like you're counting how many you're pulling out, or if you grab one falls out with it or whatnot. There's a lot of confusion and everything. Those muskets are also very hard. If you forget to load the thing down, you're not going to if it fires off or whatnot. So it's tense firing, a lot of opportunities to lose or waste ammunition as well. And then the supplies probably, do the Continentals even have a supply train that close to go back?
No, they left their supply train. Well, the baggage, the biggest chunk of their baggage is not even with the Army at this point. It's up in Bethlehem. which is way north of where we're talking about. Now, their day-to-day necessary stuff, like the extra ammo, medical supplies, that train was left at their camp the night before, which is about, depending on what column we're talking about, 15 to 20 miles away. So it depends on which column, because some columns had to go farther than others. And then they retreat past that. When they run away from there, they retreat beyond their camp of the night before, even farther away. So you have some regiments that were moving 45 miles that day and fought a battle.
Well,
Well,
did they, for the most part, do this in good order, or were they routed?
retreat is not that bad, from what I can gather from the sources. It's probably no worse than the retreat from Brandywine was.
Yeah.
There's a rear guard fight that not too many books talk about in White Marsh, where the White Marsh church is. There's a modern church on the same grounds today. It's basically at the intersection of Bethlehem Pike and what's today Route 73. There was a rear guard fight there that Wayne did. It's actually also where one of the incidents where Stephen happened, where he ordered people away that weren't even under his command. Yeah, so I mean, it wasn't it wasn't like a bull run where they're all running away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I just want to know now that someone else brought up the Civil War before Mark Malloy did in a ERW Zoom. So we already have two. We're reenacting by Mark, and then the Civil War is brought up. So if you're playing the drinking game at home, there it is. But we have, before it gets buried too far, and it goes back to us, the court-martial issues. We have a question from Gabe Neville, who's been on this before, 8th Virginia blog. Apparently, Lieutenant Colonel John Markham of the 8th Virginia was also cashiered after the battle. He says, can you interpret the charges that he, quote, left the regiment in time of action on the 4th instant and also on the retreat of the same day, also charged with delay when ordered to support the advance guard?
Well, there's definitely no delay. But I gotta check something real quick. There's definitely no delay. I mean, he's part of, I just want to confirm what brigade they're in real quick. Give me a second.
So I see that we have a question.
I don't want to give you bad information. All right, so he's under Stevens' division. So Scott's brigade. They are, first of all, he's not, that regiment's not, anything that brigade did is not at the fault of Markham. In fact, I have not found where anybody under Stevens' command did what they weren't supposed to. Stephen wasn't with his division. I mean, I think most of the battle, he's following along with Muhlenberg, from what I can gather from the sources. And Scott's brigade and McClanahan's brigade, because Woodford, who actually commanded that brigade, got wounded at Brandywine. He's not with the Army. So one of their colonels is actually commanding that brigade. So McClanahan and Scott, the two brigades under Stephen, basically fight on their own and separate it from each other because there's no direct head over them. Scott ends up basically fighting on the right flank of Green's division under Muhlenberg, and McClanahan wanders off and ends up in the Chew fight. So he's completely separated and detached from the rest of the Virginia line. But from what, getting back to that Lieutenant Colonel, I have not found any primary evidence that anybody under Stephen, any of those officers or regiments did something they weren't supposed to. I mean, they basically fought on their own and took their own initiative. And Scott's brigade was definitely involved in the collapse of Grant's division. McClanahan wanders off in the fog and ends up in the Chew fight, but that's not necessarily his fault when you have nobody directing you from above.
He's also new to brigade command as well.
Yes.
Yeah. Little harder. So yeah, we have that, and then just to clear the questions that came in, because Stephen seems to be the hot topic issue tonight. Everyone wants to. We have a question actually, I think, for Mark. Can't get away from Trenton real quick. Is there any evidence that actually Stephen did send out that retaliatory patrol at Trenton, understanding that it was a company of Virginians? Once again, those Virginians acting without orders. So
Yeah, no, yeah, it's from Roger. Yeah, no, I think they did go under without orders, but I think at the moment, Washington called up Stephen to the front of the column when their column was going down towards Trenton, and asked him if these were his men or whatever, and he replied yes, and I think Washington, blew a gasket or whatever and yelled at him. I don't know if I don't think Stephen, I don't know if he knew about the patrol or not. I have to check on that, but I'll check because I do talk about it in my book about that whole controversy. But
I heard that Stephen offered Washington a drink to calm him down. He said about it.
All I know is Washington had very little patience for Stephen. So
what happened on the banks of the Delaware cost them right after the fight at the Germantown. So it's all
yeah. Well, and going to Germantown too, I always found it interesting that one of the high-profile casualties, I guess, was this guy Nash. Who the city of Nashville, Tennessee, is actually named after. Was killed or mortally wounded, I guess.
Yeah, I can't believe he survived. Well, first I'm going to explain the wound, and then the fact he survives it for almost a week. I disagree with some of the previous authors on this that say he's wounded earlier in the action. I think it actually takes place during the British counterattack, because otherwise it doesn't make sense that British artillery wounds him earlier in the battle. It just doesn't jive. But my description of it that I found from a couple sources is that a cannon round came bouncing down the road. He had to be sitting in the middle of Germantown Avenue or road. And the round went, and I forget which leg, I think it's his left leg. It goes through his horse, goes through his left leg, and then smashes the side of the head of James Witherspoon, who's an aide in Maxwell's brigade, the New Jersey brigade, who's the son of a signer from New Jersey of the Declaration.
Oh, really?
Yeah, his dad is the president of Princeton University. I think. Hopefully I got that right. I think that's right. Somebody will question me on it if I'm wrong. Now Witherspoon's killed. He's buried in Germantown. But this leg is mangled, and the horse collapses on top of the mangled leg, and somehow they extract him. They cut the leg off with like a penknife and get him out of there. And he survives it for days. Like, it's not, I forget the exact day he dies, but it's after the army has moved like twice before he dies. He dies actually in Towamencin Township. He's buried in the Mennonite Meeting House graveyard in Towamencin Township, which is the place they move to. They retreat to Pennypacker Mills. And then a couple days later, they move into Towamencin Township, and that's where he dies. Oh, wow. So he doesn't even die at the initial retreat point.
And you're correct. It is John Witherspoon is the president of Princeton, so no one will call.
All right. I got my fact right.
There you go. So let's get it. So we've got the two house. We've got the British counterattacking. How does the battle end?
Well, the British counterattack. So the Americans that had been fighting all day are basically out of ammunition. They're just unable to stop this British assault. So they basically give up all of the ground they had gained. And then I actually think the fog allows them to escape and prevents a significant British pursuit. I mean, they will pursue up the roads a bit, but the Americans are able to get out of there. They don't, there's one regiment for sure that gets surrounded and captured, but most of the army gets out of there, other than some stragglers that get picked up and grabbed.
How ballpark casualties for both sides? What are we talking about?
That's a good question, and I should know that off the top of my head. And
I think I checked it beforehand. I think it's like under 100 killed and a few hundred wounded on both sides, right?
Yeah, it's less than Brandywine. I know that, but honestly, Mark, I don't know off the top of my head.
See, this is where you say you have to buy the book to find.
You do have to buy the book. Well, the problem is because I can't go out and promote the book right now. I don't like have all this stuff at the top of my head. Here it is. So Washington lost 152 killed, 521 wounded, and about 400 captured. But most of that captured is one regiment.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and I can tell you that regiment in a second if you want.
That's roughly about, what, 1,000 casualties, and he came into battle with, what, 11-ish?
No, they got more than that.
Wow.
I think earlier, I actually think, well, we can get into that debate too. I actually think on the books, rolls, the Army's not that much smaller than the Army that was at Brandywine because they had gotten reinforcements. However, how many of them were able-bodied and accompanied the Army in the Germantown? That may be where the 11,000 number comes in because the record keeping's not as good as later wars. But on paper, the Army's probably only slightly smaller than the Army at Brandywine. But I doubt all those guys made the attack because they had the Connecticut Brigade had joined them. They had gotten the Pennsylvania and New Jersey militia, or not the Maryland and New Jersey militia had joined the Army. So that easily replaces the casualties from Brandywine and Paoli and the other minor engagements. So then the question really is, how many able-bodied guys made the attack? That's where there's some debate about how many guys actually were at Germantown. The British Army is much smaller because of all those detachments. And if you want, I mean, I was about to find those casualty numbers for the British. I was close.
As he finds his casualties, we actually had Ted Savis on here for a few minutes, so he would say, if you really want to see it detailed, buy his book, and also that there are free book plates, apparently, signed book plates and free shipping. So
There you go.
You got to promote the hand that feeds you, right? So there it is.
Yes, we do. Here's the British casualties: 80 killed, 426 wounded, 14 missing.
I mean, those are big numbers, especially Rev War wise. I mean, I think that's significant. I mean, this is one of the more significant sized battles of the whole war.
I agree, and I think I argue that point. It's either in the preface or somewhere else in the book because it's not that much smaller of the battle than Brandywine. I mean, it's probably because the British are so much smaller there. It's probably about 5,000 to 6,000 guys less than we're at Brandywine. Ballpark. But then that makes it comparable to Saratoga or Long Island or Yorktown or Monmouth. It's very comparable to all those. And Germantown's like forgotten in history.
Yeah, okay. All right. This is the big questions here. Significance of the Battle of Germantown. Because before I came on here, I was reading a little bit about it because it's very interesting because this is, as you mentioned, this is happening at the same time as Saratoga. Saratoga gets the moniker turning point of the revolution, with the big thing being that after the Battle of Saratoga, the French realize that they can confidently join the American side and join the alliance, which shifts the balance of war. And then I've read that some historians have said, oh well, Germantown was just as important as Saratoga. Is it? What can you tell us? I guess what you think as far as its significance in France coming in on the American side, if that was its main significance, or
I actually think it's a contributor. The French foreign minister, John Adams, and Franklin all mentioned Germantown when they're talking about the treaty.
Interesting.
And remember, Germantown's before the Saratoga surrender. It's in between the two Saratoga battles. So all that news is coming in at the same time. The fact that I think the fact that the Army under Washington made this bold effort, even though they don't win, I think it shows the French something. That even Washington himself's willing to strike a blow. And the fact that the people doing the negotiating mention it means it meant something.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you always hear Saratoga, but even though Germantown was a defeat, technically a tactical defeat, I mean, for Washington just to get bloodied at Brandywine, for them to lose their capital, and then for him to come back and strike again.
And here's something that most people probably don't even realize. Washington's attack on Germantown is the first time that Washington leads the main army against the main British army in an attack.
Mm.
He's not going after a detachment like Trenton.
Mm-hmm.
He's not defending like Brandywine or Long Island or any of those other places. He attacked the main British force. It was the first time he did it.
And I mean, I think that's what plays major. I mean, I've done a little to try to find the research because Virgins, whatever, however you pronounce my French is, and Briennes. I mean, he does credit it. I mean, and he takes it in that European mindset. I mean, an army that has been defeated at Brandywine, and he wouldn't know the exact particulars, lost its capital, they maneuvered out. Suddenly, not only does they launch an attack, but launch a sophisticated attack with multiple and comes within I mean, as Napoleon would say, you're better to be a lucky than a good general on the field. Some unlucky one decision here, some fog, etc., from defeating the main British army. And I think, shows.
Okay, well, this begs the other question then.
Okay.
Why then is this significant battle that all these people at the time attributed to its importance? Why has it been forgotten, and why doesn't anybody know about it? It's not really, celebrated.
I have a couple of theories on it.
Okay, I love to hear it.
Well, a couple of theories. I think in the post-war years, it gets overshadowed by Brandywine and Saratoga, and then Monmouth,
mm-hmm.
which are all relatively close together. But I also have a personal theory, from a historiography point of view, is that sites that are not NPS, Trenton, Princeton, Brandywine, Germantown, Long Island,
mm-hmm.
Camden,
Monmouth,
nobody writes about them.
Mm-hmm.
Look at the history of like full-length military history studies of Revolutionary War battles, and you could probably count on one hand the ones that are older than 10 to 15 years from now, like before like modern historians started looking at them. There isn't anything out there, or very little. Nobody studies it. But then you look at Saratoga and Yorktown and Guilford Courthouse and Kings Mountain. There's all kinds of books. Well, they're all NPS sites. It's just a personal theory. I think there's a reason for that.
Yeah, I think for me too. I think battlefields are, to me, that plays a big role in part of that learning about the history going to the site. And like I said, you can go to Cliveden, you can see where some of this action happened. But yeah, when you want to go, follow down the paths where some of these, it's kind of like, being in Trenton or some of these other urban areas where you don't get the feel of a battlefield park, even though that important history happened right where you're walking.
But I think it even goes beyond that. I spent some time growing up in South Jersey and working at historic sites in Pennsylvania. But I was trained under the NPS at Fredericksburg. Mm-hmm. That's where I got my real training, where it was all about knowing the history, and you're not going to go talk to the public if you don't know what you're talking about. Mm-hmm. And then so I came from that background, working under Bobby Crick, and you don't go near the public if I don't trust you to go near the public. And then I get out of college and I move back home and I get a job working for the state system in Pennsylvania, where that was none of it. They didn't care if you knew the history. They didn't care if you did research. You're going to keep giving the same bad tour we've been giving since the 50s, and you're going to like it. And I had a huge issue with that, coming from my background. And so when I transferred to Brandywine and I took a position at Brandywine from another state site, I was like, I'm not working like this. And then I was the supervisor of interpretation. And I'm like, we're going to actually research this battle. We're going to get rid of these stinking myths that I know are myths. I just got to prove it. And then we're going to redo, but you got fought from the Union. The Union didn't want any part of that. And then you got all these, so that's just an example of Brandywine and why you had so much bad history at Brandywine. There's nothing in Germantown, except if you want to go tour the Cliveden House or the Chew House, and their focus is on urban issues and African-American history because of where they're located, and they don't even talk about the battle. So, it's hard to find good history and people willing to write about it when you go to these sites and you're not getting that good history.
Yeah.
And additionally, I think, so, and I'll just end that point too. Additionally too, I mean, it's tough too when you're trying to do quote unquote popular military history, and Saratoga is clearly defined. There is a winner, there's a loser. At Germantown, especially on the American side, it's murky. Yeah, it's a moral victory. Yeah, it's maybe a victory with international complications. But how do you explain that to somebody? How do you dress that up into, hey, this is, I mean, a clear-cut victory that leads on the road? And I mean, it is, yeah, and it's sandwiched there. I mean, you think of 1777, you ask most people, the only thing they'll remember in 1777, if not Saratoga, is, oh, Washington's men froze at Valley Forge.
Yes.
And that's the defining moment. And I know that is also another national park site. It's amazing that the Park Service has two of the biggest winter encampments of any army, and while spending time in Fredericksburg as well, yeah, they gloss over that winter. They don't even preserve the sites of the winter encampment of the Union Army there. They're like, oh yeah, it's out. It's in that other town.
Give you a little side history, Phil. Valley Forge was not originally NPS. That was originally part of the state system that I worked for, and they handed it over for the bicentennial.
That's true. But I was trying to lead you to breadcrumbs to show that the state and NPS actually work together. Things. Mark and I are both National Park Service Rangers, so we're treading carefully here about the organization and everything, and about what if we're still doing history in the Park Service. So we'll leave it right there because I don't want to get fired for a EOW Zoom. So as unless Mark, I know you had one more point. We have a few questions I'd like to get to from some of our listeners, but I think I cut you off with something about memory or so forth.
Yeah, no, I mean, I just think that the memory of this battle is pretty interesting. I mean, do you know the Howard Pyle painting? Do you know, because it's on your cover of your book, and I think that's at the Brandywine Museum there.
It's in the Delaware Art Museum.
Oh, okay. I mean, I think it's a pretty dramatic image, and it shows the guys, I guess, using some sort of like thing to try and knock down the door. I mean, would you say this is an accurate representation?
I actually had a lot of trouble deciding what cover art I wanted to use, because most of the images, because I had such a great cover for Brandywine, like it really stood out. It grabbed people, and I was having trouble finding something for this one. You know, a lot of the paintings of this are from far away, like the house is in the distance. It's hard to see the people. I actually debated using one that's in the Arlington house.
I was gonna say.
I actually debated using that one because I wanted something that wasn't used on other books.
Okay.
And so I really was thinking about that. And then the more I looked at this one, I mean, it's not quite as crisp and nice as my Brandywine one, but I ended up falling in love with this cover, even though it's not 100% accurate. This is the one I ended up going with.
I think it's a great painting, but yeah, I like that you mentioned it at Arlington House, which George Washington's grandson actually, he built and wanted to turn into a museum, and he was an amateur painter. I don't know what you thought of his actual painting style. A lot of people criticized the figures and stuff like that, but of the main moments in Washington's military career, he paints Trenton, he paints Princeton. He paints Monmouth, Yorktown, and Germantown. Interestingly, not Brandywine.
Brandywine's not so good for Washington.
We're gonna have another Zoom about that.
Before we go down into that rabbit hole of Washington, and I bring up a virtual fight about George. Let's go with the one question: how much Mike new material did you find when doing this study?
That's a good question. I found, wow, I don't even know how. So I've got a letter, well, just without getting too specific, several British officer account letters that I had not seen in previous works. A lot of stuff out of Scotland, the Scotland National Library, or Scottish Archives, I think it was, that I stumbled on. A lot of pension record accounts, and they're important, because you got to kind of take them with a grain of salt because they're written so much later. But there's a lot of, I don't think there's a study that gives any real credit to the Maryland and New Jersey militia. And I think there's way too much evidence to the contrary. So I've got a lot on them and the structure of those brigades, which you don't see in previous books. But I also, I mean, there's a lot of liars and dyers without going too specific that I stumbled on in this process. But I actually think I really wanted to get a tactical level study, which you don't see on a lot of Rev War battle studies. And so I tried to write, just like when I did Brandywine, I tried to write, because I grew up on Civil War history. So like, I wanted a tactical level, regimental level study, and I never understood why people didn't do that for Rev War battles. Like every Rev War battle book you pick up, it's kind of basic, doesn't go into a lot of like common soldier level detail. I'm like, why aren't people doing that like they do Civil War history? And so when I did Brandywine, I really wanted to go that route, which was not easy. And then, but Brandywine was also about busting the myths. I didn't find the myths with Germantown like I did Brandywine, but I still wanted to get that tactical level study from the common soldier's point of view and what individual brigades and regiments were doing like I did with Brandywine.
So there's enough new material for people to read the book. Another question, the British dead from Germantown, do you know where they are buried at? Is there any buried in the local area?
Yeah, there's some churchyards in Germantown that they're buried at. There was something called the upper burial ground, the lower burial ground. They're both still there. The two senior officers that were killed, James Agnew and Lieutenant Colonel Byrd, are in the de Benneville family cemetery. Good luck finding that and take a bulletproof vest with you. Basically on the northern fringe of what was the battlefield, there was a family farm, the de Benneville family. And those two officers were originally buried in Germantown proper. But when the Army evacuates Germantown later in the month, they decide to move de Benneville was a loyalist. They decided to move those two bodies to his family plot on his farm, and that's where they still are. I tracked that down. That's in a fun area of Philadelphia.
Yeah. Now, who died at Grumblethorpe?
That's Agnew.
Agnew, yeah. They reenacted that too.
Yeah, and then Byrd dies in the house. So if you know the Summer White House from the yellow fever epidemic, so that house,
yeah,
the house right next to it, just to the, would that be the west of it? I guess it would be the stone house that's right next to it is the house Byrd dies in.
Oh, really?
It's called Bringhurst.
Huh.
And they're both NPS houses.
Okay.
If you go take the tour of the Summer White House, you start the tour in Bringhurst.
Oh, really? Okay.
You have to schedule that though. It's not like got regular hours.
If you do get a quote unquote bulletproof vest and make it, the cemeteries are accessible.
Yeah, they are. And I'm making it sound worse than it is, but I mean, Germantown, if you live in the Philly area like I do, they're on the news every morning with shootings.
Yeah.
I mean, there are issues. Just now, Clifton's actually kind of okay because Clifton's kind of not in Germantown proper. You got to kind of go farther in the town. Clifton's kind of on the outskirts of all that. So, you know, if you want to go visit the grounds of the Chew House or visit that house, I would recommend it. You're going to be okay there. It's just when you want to venture a little farther in, you might want to be careful.
There you go. And so we'll end with this question as we wrap up. Was Knox's advice based on inexperience, or was it just the right idea poorly executed? The guy says, I believe Knox established an artillery school. Where did that expertise and training come from? Was that Knox? So a double-ended question.
Yes, it is. Well, Knox is I don't even know, how do I want to explain that? Knox is sort of he read a lot and taught himself. He didn't go to any formal military schools. He wasn't a military guy before the revolution. He owned a bookstore and read a lot. I mean, I'm kind of making a joke about it, but that's the reality of it. And really, he gets his position as chief of artillery for getting the guns from Fort Ticonderoga, to the siege of Boston. That's really the only reason they make him chief of artillery, not because of any expertise. I actually think his advice was wrong, and Washington shouldn't have listened to him. But you can argue with me about that if you want.
Have Zoom on
After you read the book.
Yeah.
If you read the book, then you can argue with Mike on not. There it is. But that's the price of entering into an argument. But there. Final thoughts. We'll go with Mark first. Final thoughts on Germantown.
No, I think it's great. Thank you for writing the book. Like you were just talking about, I think we really have a need for more in-depth military histories when it comes to the Revolutionary War battles. As you mentioned, there's a lot of it's way too oversimplified or very generic. So I appreciate the work you're doing to write this book, and appreciate you sitting down and talking a little bit about Germantown, which, like we said, I think it gets too little love. So glad you're shining a light on an oft overlooked subject. So thank you.
Well, thank you. Shameless book plug. The book does cover other things. So just those of you that read my Brandywine book, you know that book ends basically 5 days after Brandywine. So this book is almost like a second volume to the Philadelphia campaign, where it picks up where Brandywine ends. So Battle of the Clouds is in this book, Paoli. There's a little known action at a place called Billingsport along the Delaware River that I cover, part of the fight for the river. And then obviously Germantown's in it. And then, because I'm insane, there will be a start of a third volume to cover the river for Mercer, Fort Mifflin, White Marsh. None of that's in here. That's going to take another book.
Yeah, so that means we just have to have Mike back on another ERW Zoom to talk about those locations in the future. So make sure you go out. I've got my copy right here. It actually is worth even more. It has Mike's signature on it. You can get copies. Follow the link on our ERW. Thanks, Mike, for all you've done, especially Brandywine. And we had someone that said you've given a great tour. He's been on your tour 3 times there at Brandywine. So thanks for all your work, bringing a tactical study, and also putting your reputation on the line, not once, but twice, by hanging out with us here at the Emerging Revolutionary War. So with that, I'll wrap it up. Also, feel free to ask any questions following. I mean, we can give them to Mike and your answer back. But otherwise, we'll see you next Sunday back here at 7 o'clock for the next installment of the Historian Happy Hour, Rev War Revelry. So Mark, Mike, once again, thank you for joining, and everyone have a good evening, and see you next week.
All right, thank you.